Gold fever builds fortunes and destroys lives.
If you're the first in, you make a fortune. If you're the last in, you lose all your money.
A century later, the hidden story of the gold rush lies deep below the rivers, lakes, and even the streets of the American West. Imagine if we could empty the oceans, letting the water drain away to reveal the secrets of the seafloor. Now we can, using accurate data and astonishing technology, to bring light once again into a lost world. What can a mystery shipwreck tell us about the deadly perils of the gold rush?
About 100,000 people set off, and only about 30,000 made it.
When being first is everything, is any risk worth taking?
He was asked, do you want to slow down? And he's like, no, let her rip.
And what extraordinary secret lies buried beneath one of America's greatest cities?
There could be as many as 100 vessels buried under the streets of San Francisco.
This is gold country. The rugged northwest of the American continent. An epic landscape that's home to a truly epic story.
The quest for gold has been a defining aspect of world history. Great movements of people, the rise of new states, of new cities, of new nations. We can't underestimate the power of the gold rush.
Throughout the 19th century, hundreds of thousands of fortune hunters raced to the gold fields of North America, knowing that just a few nuggets can transform their lives. In 1896, the most extraordinary rush of them all starts here. In the Klondike, deep in Yukon Territory, northern Canada. One of the most remote places on Earth. At the heart of the region sits Lake LaBarge. And in the lake, a gold rush mystery. An international team of maritime archaeologists have come here to investigate the Klondike gold rush. Even in the height of summer, the waters of Lake LaBarge are dangerously cold.
You only have about 30 to 40 minutes in the water before you freeze to death.
But the team is willing to take the risk because of what's lying on the bottom of the lake.
As you swim toward the wreck, it comes at you out of this brilliant green, like a ghost ship. Like it just is waiting for you.
It's clearly a ship, but like no other ever found in the Yukon. In their short time underwater, the team records glimpses of the wreck. They want to know what it's doing here. To understand more, we can turn to high-resolution scans and data mapping. Use powerful computer software. Empty Lake LaBarge and reveal a remarkable sight. exposed to the light of day for the first time in over 100 years. A complete 19th century steamer. Perfectly preserved, right down to the logs in its boiler. But with its open decks, it seems more suited to the subtropical Mississippi than the frozen wastes of northern Canada. So, what's it doing here? Delving into historical records, the team pieces together a story that starts in the summer of 1896. Prospectors explore deep in the Yukon Valley. In a tributary of the Klondike River, Native American Skookum Jim Mason and his partners are panning for gold. They find so much, they renamed the place Bonanza Creek.
The Klondike discovery of gold in Canada's Yukon couldn't have happened in a more inopportune place. It's very much out of the way, and it's also subarctic, so it gets very cold. Very, very cold.
More prospectors strike it rich. And soon, word spreads like wildfire. By the summer of 1897, fortune hunters jostle for places on ships heading north from Seattle. 100,000 people are trying to reach the Klondike. Before them, an epic challenge. First, a voyage to Alaska, then overland to the headwaters of the Yukon River, the jumping-off point for a perilous journey downstream to the gold fields. And simply to reach the headwaters, they have to cross a huge mountain range. The quickest way through is also the hardest.
The Chilkoot Trail was the shortest land route into the headwaters of the Yukon River, but the problem of getting into those headwaters was that 3,600-foot pass. And the last 4 miles was at a 35-degree slope.
By the time the army of prospectors arrives, it's deep winter, with temperatures down to -40.
Many people couldn't make it. You would pass out from exhaustion, be unable to continue. Countless numbers turned back at that point. They just were unable to keep going.
Those that do reach the river are still 300 miles from the gold. And the Yukon is frozen solid. They spend the rest of the winter chopping down trees and building makeshift boats.
Many who were building boats had no experience at all. And so they actually would call these boats coffin boats, these rough structures that were meant to pass through these incredible rapids and even the deep water lake. And so many of them, you would die at that boat.
One thing is clear. In the Yukon of late 1897, the key to striking it rich is transport. Which casts new light on the mystery wreck. It's definitely not a coffin boat. Where they use oars, this has a paddle wheel. Where they use sails and muscle power, this has a boiler. And where they're made of wood and nails, this has iron plates and rivets. Faster and stronger than any wooden rival. A gold prospector's dream.
It's the old rule that if you're the first in, you make a fortune. If the second in, you maybe break even. And if you're the third in, you lose all your money.
A key question remains. How could a heavy metal ship have gotten here? Across some of the most unforgiving terrain on the planet, and with no obvious river route to the coast. The answer lies in the drained wreck itself. The sheets of metal which make up the hull are crudely riveted and bolted together. The boiler is unusually small for a steamship. In fact, every part of the steamer is small, light, and crucially, portable. This is its secret. It doesn't sail here at all. It is carried. Its metal hull and engine are hauled over the mountains.
The hull was made in San Francisco. They added engine components to it from Seattle, and then the whole thing was shipped up in pieces, hauled across the mountain, and assembled. There's nothing like it.
The designers of this prefabricated steamship are a remarkable pair of entrepreneurs. Husband and wife, Albert and Clara Goddard.
Goddard realizes the key to opening up the run is to use a modern steamer. Iron-hulled, strong and efficient. What the Goddards come up with is genius.
May 1898. An army of gold prospectors jostle for position, waiting for the ice to melt, and 7,000 handmade boats stand ready.
The long grip of winter and darkness is coming to an end. The ice is beginning to crack and groan as the temperatures rise, and everybody's poised and waiting for that moment.
Suddenly, the way north is open. The race is on.
It was an incredible scene at like rush hour traffic with all these ridiculous little boats.
And one boat enjoys a huge advantage. Assembled during the depths of winter, weighing 15 tons, with a flat bottom, built to navigate shallow stretches of the Yukon River, and named after her designer, the A.J. Goddard. The prospectors crammed on board, paid for the privilege of getting to the goldfields quickly, piloted by Clara Goddard herself.
We don't have a written record of what happened, but 22 people crowded onto this tiny boat where there's no interior cabin. There's nowhere to go to get out of the elements.
Steaming ahead at a steady 6 knots, she leaves the makeshift coffin boats in her wake. But downstream lies the fearsome White Horse Rapids. 3 miles of raging rock-strewn waters. Unknown numbers of people lose their lives here. But the Goddard's flat-bottom design helps them navigate through the rapids with ease. And after just 5 days, she arrives in the boomtown of Dawson, gateway to the goldfields.
As the Goddard steams into Dawson City, it was met with cheers from the townspeople who had never seen such a boat come into the town before. It was quite a reception.
It's a huge success. Now Albert and Clara plan to make their fortune running prospectors back and forth to Dawson. But the Goddard never makes the trip again. What goes wrong? Archaeologists want to know why the A.J. Goddard never travels to the Klondike goldfields again, and today lies at the bottom of Lake LaBarge. Now drained, the wreck seems to be in perfect repair. But accounts from the late 19th century reveal an issue that Albert and Clara Goddard hadn't thought through: gravity.
When they were going to the gold fields, they were going with the rapids, they were going downriver. Now when they're returning, they're having to go upriver past some really strong water. The Goddard wasn't built for that.
The Goddard's boiler is small enough to be carried over a mountain, but too small to generate the power needed to plow upstream through the mighty White Horse Rapids. The Goddards have miscalculated.
At some points, they had to tie ropes to the boat and pull it through the more difficult sections.
The Goddard never attempts the run to Dawson again. Her days of transporting high-paying prospectors are over, before they ever really begin. Instead, she becomes a humble ferry boat here on Lake LaBarge, where she spends the next 3 years carrying supplies for prospectors back and forth across the lake. There's a final question. Why does she now lie on the bottom? There's no sign of damage on the wreck itself. But in October 1901, Lake LaBarge is hit by the worst storm of the year. The Goddards are working the lake, carrying 4 crew and 1 passenger. Suddenly, she's surrounded by a mass of churning waves.
You're used to seeing ocean storms with these mountainous waves, and they're very high. You don't get waves like that on the lakes. They're often at the maximum 6 to 8 feet high. But where they're dangerous is they're much closer together and they're much steeper.
Waves crash on deck, and water fills the firebox, leaving the Goddard powerless. She drifts, carried by the storm.
Finally, enough water floods into the hull, going through the hatches, that it just weighs too much, and it sinks to the bottom.
Two men somehow make it to the shore, but 3 drown. The Goddard still lies at the bottom of the lake, a telling example of the hope, the ingenuity, but also the disappointment at the heart of so many gold rush stories.
About 100,000 people set off for the gold fields, and only about 30,000 made it. For those who got there, the best claims were already staked, so they arrived and everything was taken.
Gold, to the value of nearly $900 million in today's prices, is unearthed in the 3 years of the Klondike Rush. But fewer than 4,000 prospectors ever find any, and only a few hundred make big money. Today, little evidence of those dramatic days remains. The Yukon is once again a realm of forest, snow, and ice. But 1,500 miles to the south, and 50 years earlier, there's another gold rush, one that changes America and the world forever. 200 years ago, San Francisco is a tiny settlement. James Delgado, archaeologist from Search Incorporated, wants to know how it turned into the global city it is today. The key is a single discovery. Right next to San Francisco's iconic Trans-America Pyramid, where over 40 years ago, Delgado first glimpses something extraordinary.
In May 1978, I was standing basically right here, looking down at the outline of a ship in the mud 20 feet below me.
A wooden ship right in the heart of the financial district. Buried beneath the streets. What's it doing here? To learn more, we can use the latest computer imaging technology. Stripping away the 21st century surface. Peeling back 150 years of urban development. Even draining away the thick layers of silt that lie under the city. To expose the ghostly outline of a sailing ship from the mid-19th century. Its name, the Niantic. An ocean-going merchant ship, the workhorse of the seas, built to carry cargo from the US to China and across the world. So, what's she doing beneath the streets of San Francisco? The story of the ship under San Francisco starts in January 1848, amid the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. James Marshall, a carpenter, spots something yellow and shiny in the water channel of a sawmill he's building.
When asked what it is, he says, "Boys, I believe I found me a gold mine." And then that simple act of plucking a sun-struck fleck of gold from that mill race, James Marshall set off one of the most incredible migrations of humankind, the California Gold Rush.
Over the next decade, 300,000 people will head west. Ordinary men and women abandon their homes, jobs, farms, and families, driven by the chance to find gold.
People came from England, Ireland, France, Germany. In fact, it probably was the first time on the planet that so many people from all over the world gathered in one place.
The 49ers, as they're called, face a huge challenge getting to the gold fields. Crossing the continent takes months. They risk starvation, disease, or attack by hostile Native American tribes. It's faster by sea, and many 49ers head to Panama, crossing the isthmus through the swelteringly hot jungle. Thousands pay the ultimate price.
At one stage, Panama City had more dead 49ers buried in its soil than it had living Panamanians.
Those that survive begin the third leg of their journey, sailing north to San Francisco. One of the ships that will make that voyage is the Niantic, recently converted to carry passengers. San Francisco's maritime archives reveal what happened next.
This is the Niantic logbook.
Wow.
There.
This is like the iconic scene.
The skipper, Captain Henry Cleveland, crams 249 fortune seekers on board, each paying an exorbitant amount of money, desperate to get to California.
Here's Niantic's passengers coming out in boats to meet the ship.
They would have charged around $250 in 1849 prices, which today's is about $5,000. So very much more than the going rate would have cost, but they had no other option.
Niantic arrives in San Francisco in July 1849. home to just a few thousand traders and sailors. But her logbook reveals that Niantic's passengers aren't the only ones dreaming of riches.
Captain Cleveland holds off anchors and has his passengers ferried ashore by boat with their baggage. But he begins to worry, as he should, because gold fever is rampant and his crew are beginning to mutter.
Baggage ashore, 5, the crew deserted.
The last entry here, on July 12th, 1849, as the crew is breaking out the last of the run, everything that's stored in the ship.
One by one, the crew deserts and heads for the hills. A week after arriving in San Francisco, the ship sits in the cove almost completely empty. So why didn't the ship's owners simply hire another crew and sail her away? The answer to that also lies beneath the streets of San Francisco. Removing yet more tons of ancient silt reveals that Niantic is far from alone. She's just one of a vast fleet of ghost ships lying deep beneath the modern city. Evidence of an extraordinary story.
In 1849 alone, 762 American ships come to San Francisco, joined by hundreds of others from around the world.
Scores of vessels are now moored alongside the Niantic, all bringing prospectors to California.
Unfortunately, most of these vessels arrived in San Francisco and their crews deserted.
What you find, ultimately, is a scene described by contemporaries as a forest of masts, with hundreds of these ships sitting there, with no place to go and nothing to do.
And now, another astonishing part of the Gold Rush story comes into play. In just 6 months, San Francisco's population leaps from 5,000 to 25,000. The town needs to grow, and fast. Entrepreneurs come up with the perfect solution. Ships like Niantic will become the city.
So these savvy businessmen decided we're going to use these vessels for a new function. They were hauled ashore and used for store ships. They were also used for boarding houses, as churches, as offices.
Niantic is hauled onto the mudflats and converted into a warehouse.
And so it is that getting close to 200 of these ships are converted temporarily or permanently into floating buildings.
Landfill is dumped into the shallow waters of the cove, and the city grows. Soon, it extends around the beached ships, far out into the San Francisco Bay.
There's construction everywhere, on the piers, on land. You can hear it. The sounds of the city are just a cacophony of construction sounds that began at dawn and went into the night.
What was once sea is now the streets and sidewalks of San Francisco's financial district.
There could be as many as 100 vessels buried under the streets of San Francisco. Only a small number of those have been found, but as new buildings are built and new excavations are done, it's likely that we're going to find more of those.
That's why we refer to San Francisco's financial district as a gold rush Pompeii.
Niantic holds one last surprise. Found in the wreck is evidence of San Francisco's burgeoning wealth.
Jacques et son fils from Reims. Real small vineyard then. Still a pretty expensive champagne. They continue to make it.
Oh, how cool.
San Francisco isn't the only part of California that's booming. 120 miles away, Near the gold fields of the Sierra Nevada, other towns are growing fast. What can these strange timbers at the bottom of the Sacramento River tell us of the dark side of the gold rush? Sacramento, state capital of California. Through the city flows the 400-mile Sacramento River. In 1849, it's the vital artery of the gold rush. After landing in San Francisco, the 49ers continue their journey to the gold fields inland by sailing along the river. Archaeologists discover a wreck on the riverbed here, right in the heart of the modern city.
And in those dives, what we found in the murkiness of the Sacramento River was a portion of the hull broken at its back or its keel, lying there, but with the whole form or the body of the hull itself still there for us to see.
Historical research comes up with a name, LaGrange, a ship known to have carried prospectors to the city in 1849. Today, archaeologists return to the river, hoping to learn more. But it's a challenge.
The Sacramento River, it's always carrying silt because it runs down the valley. So to look for gold rush ships, we need to use a sonar that sees through that sediment to see the bones of a gold rush vessel.
Yeah, so it's 1.6 aft and it's 0.5 starboard.
Based on the sonar data from the latest survey, we can start to drain the water from the river. To reveal a gold rush wreck. The partial remains of a ship's hull, clearly visible. Exploring deeper inside reveals something surprising. Metal ring bolts. Like those used to restrain captives on a slave ship. But what would be their purpose in the gold rush? California is never a slave state, so the reason for the ring bolts remains unclear. To understand more, the team delves into LaGrange's past.
Okay, go ahead, pour it out that way.
You see this thing right here?
Yeah. In line, turn the fish off.
They discover she's a seagoing bark, first used to take cargo between New York and Savannah. Then, to cash in on gold fever, she's converted to carry 63 fortune seekers. In early 1849, she sails from Salem, Massachusetts, arriving in San Francisco 7 months later. Then, she continues up the Sacramento River before docking along the waterfront. From here, her passengers travel on to the gold fields on foot.
Follow the shoreline here.
But a ship taking prospectors to the gold fields wouldn't need restraining bolts. So, what are they for? Local archives reveal she spends the last 10 years of her life simply moored on the riverbank. Did her crew desert to join the gold rush, or is there another explanation? Gold Rush, California is a dangerous and violent place.
You had people coming from all over the world trying to strike it rich, and that caused tension because you had people getting in brawls, people pulling knives, people pulling guns.
Along with theft, assault, and murder, there's ethnic tension too.
So you have American mobs assaulting Chileans, other Hispanics and Chinese, as well as Native Indians, to clear the land or to send a message that you're not welcome.
Sacramento needs a solution. And so LaGrange is converted from a sailing ship to become a floating jailhouse.
It's out of town. It's on the river. It is controlled and self-contained, and so it serves a perfect purpose as not only a place in which you can incarcerate, but one which you can completely control and keep inaccessible.
Today, the prison ship LaGrange lies beneath layers of silt on the riverbed. And the reason she sinks casts light on another dark chapter of the gold rush.
One of the biggest fears of every gold seeker is that everybody else gets to it first.
Prospectors take extreme measures to get their hands on whatever gold is left, blasting riverbeds and cliff faces with high-pressure water cannons to expose hidden seams.
The California landscape in the gold fields is dramatically changed forever. Entire hillsides are washed free of mud and of anything growing on them, leaving only barren rock.
The mud and uprooted trees flow downstream. The Sacramento becomes ever more clogged with silt. Over time, it becomes more prone to flooding. When a huge storm hits the city, LaGrange is threatened by rising water. The guards and prisoners manage to escape. But she sinks to the bottom of the river, where today she still lies, as a reminder that the lust for gold led many 49ers not to a fortune, but disgrace. In California, everything comes back to the gold rush. Many immigrants stay on, building the great cities of San Francisco, Sacramento, and Stockton. But others can't get out quick enough. Off the coast of Southern California, can the wreck of another great gold rush ship explain how even those who manage to get rich are always one false step from disaster? Gold isn't just transforming California. By the early 1850s, some of those who struck pay dirt are returning home. To towns and cities back east, to Europe, to China. Gold helps kickstart the economy of the entire world. But those leaving the Golden State put themselves in a new kind of peril. On December 1st, 1853, the steamship Winfield Scott leaves San Francisco for Panama, carrying 450 passengers and gold, today worth over $30 million.
It was a normal journey, one that steamships had done many, many times before.
The Winfield Scott is an ocean-going steamer whose builders declare no expense has been spared to achieve strength, safety, and speed. She even has first-class cabins for those who struck it rich.
These ships are amazing. You know, they were built stoutly with white live oak. They had 4 decks. The machinery on these were just state-of-the-art.
She has sailed this route 8 times before, but this time, she never reaches Panama. The research vessel Shearwater is heading towards the Channel Islands, a few miles off the coast of Southern California. She's carrying a team of archaeologists, plus experts from NOAA, America's scientific agency that monitors climate and seas. They want to learn more about the final, fateful voyage of the Winfield Scott. The Channel Islands are home to a protected national marine sanctuary. But Dee Dee Marks, an archaeologist with Search Incorporated, and her colleague, NOAA official Bob Schwemmer, regularly dive the wreck.
You never know what you're going to encounter. The wind and the waves and the seasons uncover things and recover things, so you might find new features of the hull you hadn't found before, as well as new artifacts.
In these waters, the sands continually shift. So every expedition is a new adventure. These remains of the Winfield Scott lie in shallow water. Her wooden hull has rotted away, her metal parts covered with decades of marine growth. To see her in detail and understand what happened here, we can combine 3D scanning data with visualization software and pull the plug on the Pacific Ocean. Slowly, the remains of the Winfield Scott appear. Hidden from view, since she set out laden with the gold of California. 2 paddle wheels lie exposed, and a handful of metal parts. But the most significant thing about the wreck isn't what it is, but where it is. The drained landscape of the Channel Islands reveals the Winfield Scott is not alone. Scattered across the seabed lie dozens of other shipwrecks. These waters are clearly dangerous. So why was she here? In the mid-19th century, most ships give the Channel Islands a wide berth, sailing past them and onto Central America. But in local archives, researchers discover evidence that the Winfield Scott decides to take a calculated risk.
We're very fortunate with the diaries from some of the passengers that were on board the Winfield Scott.
The captain, Simon Blunt, has studied the area for the U.S. Coastal Survey a few years before. And he's sure he knows a safe route directly through the islands.
Captain Simon Blunt felt pretty confident about coming through the Santa Barbara Channel because it cut 100 miles off his course. And of course, getting to Panama first, or Panama to San Francisco, you got bragging rights.
It's not just bragging rights. It's cold, hard cash. Competition is fierce between rival shipping lines, all vying for a slice of the action on this most lucrative run.
The Winfield Scott's owners were very keen on getting there quicker. That means they could turn around and make a return trip, hence more money in their pockets.
On the night of December 1st, 1853, the islands are shrouded in dense fog. But Captain Blunt isn't worried.
He was actually asked in the wheelhouse about, do you want to slow down? It's kind of getting, you know, foggy and a bit dirty out.
The coastline of Anacapa Island.
Water begins coming in. You're standing there in a moment on a deck that is heaving, with timbers cracking and moaning, with steam hissing out of pipes as cold seawater pours in, with the hull ripping and tearing on rocks.
All the passengers scramble onto this windswept shore. The ship's cargo of gold is salvaged. But some of those carrying the precious ore in their personal luggage aren't so lucky. Passengers who have risked everything to achieve their gold rush dream see it lost on the seafloor.
To have that voyage end in shipwreck had to be heartbreaking because they would have lost everything. All that effort, all that work, all gone.
Great shot.
That's really good. It looks so cool.
Today, the wreck of the Winfield Scott still speaks loudly of the huge wealth generated in the gold rush era.
So within a span of 5 years, from San Francisco being a tent city, in a blink of an eye really, you had a bustling city and you had steamships like the Winfield Scott that were able to have passengers that could afford a first-class stateroom on their way home.
By the end of the 1850s, just a decade after the first discovery, $187 billion worth of gold in today's money is pulled from the mountains of California. An extraordinary decade of adventure, endeavor, and sometimes heartbreak that utterly transforms America. California becomes the 31st state of the Union, a booming economy that's soon home to 400,000 settlers. The gold rush opens up the American West, and in so doing, creates the modern United States.